appreciate the time you all put into it. So without further ado, let me share my screen here. Okay, hopefully you are seeing the spreadsheet, only slightly altered. And you'll see down at the bottom, there is the complete list. There's the eligible list. And here you'll see top half. So this is a combination of everything that somebody said they wanted to have in our final review. So we narrowed it down successfully, team, to I think 99. Oh, I think it's 100 actually. Hold on. I think we narrowed it down to 100, and we'll talk about this yellow one here in a minute, but we narrowed it down to 100. If I only took ones that got 2 or more votes, didn't include the ones that got 1 vote, not that I'm necessarily recommending that, but just to give you an idea, that got us all the way down to 48. So if we took out everything that only got one sort of vote, one person who said, yes, let's keep this in the top half, then we get down to just 48 applications. So probably getting us a little closer to where we need to be. Again, not saying that's necessarily the route we want to go. Either way, we made some progress in limiting the list that we're going to move forward for additional consideration. As I was looking at everyone's homework assignments, there were a number of questions that came up regarding eligibility. And Erica and her team today took a look at that list and provided some feedback via email. So you should all have an email in your inbox. Just came around this afternoon. I just got her the list this morning, so she moved pretty quickly. You should have an email that came in this afternoon that discusses some of those eligibility questions. One of those was this one that's marked in yellow, the Turner House, say Turner Health maybe, Vibrant Health, mental health response to COVID-19. Erica noted that that one should actually have been marked as eligible, and because it had a couple of people ask questions about it, I included it in this top half list, especially since there had been that misunderstanding. Commissioner Townsend?
Well, good afternoon, all, Madam Chair. I think I would rather go through law school again to this.
That's saying something. That's saying something.
I'm gonna fess up. As hard as I worked for the last week, I was a bit confused about whether I was supposed to be adding or not adding things. So, but I did go through all 171, 72 of them. I too had some questions. I saw some that looked the same, but some were not eligible and others were. So I was glad to see, you know, I wasn't the only one that had the questions. There may have been different ones, but, you know, I too had some questions. And I do want to be able to vote. So I'm going to go back after this meeting and make sure I know what these numbers are. Are the numbers on the side, do they correlate with the same numbers on that overall list that had 172 or not? These are just...
No, because okay. I cut out all of those that no one had supported that had turned in homework thus far. And Gail and I spoke this morning, but like we discussed this morning, Gail, I think the biggest thing will be, I need to know if there's anything that isn't on this list that you would add.
Right.
A lot of them everybody was on board with, you know, some of the applications. So those are already obviously moving on to that sort of next step. It's those ones that maybe nobody else had expressed an interest in that I would want to know if they were on the list.
Okay. And some of these I remember by their name, but a lot I don't. So I'll just go in crisscross because I do want to vote. So I apologize to my other. I wasn't a slacker, but like I said, I think I would have rather gone through the first year of law school again.
It was a lot of information. All right. Erica noted in the chat that her team is happy to answer, have a side conversation in more depth about any of the applications that were marked ineligible that you still have questions about after looking at that email. And we can always circle back around and add those back into the list if, you know, there's additional concern after talking to Erica and her team, but she did provide that explanation by email for each of those. There were about maybe 10 or 12 that there were questions about between all of the different homeworks. I could just put all the questions together into one. So I'm open, obviously, to discussion on how I want to move forward. I didn't plan on necessarily going through all of these today as a group. I think the question we need to determine is how we want to move forward with this now slightly smaller list that we have created. Probably the first question is whether we want to go straight to just reviewing the top half with the 2+, or we want to leave the full top half, all 100 applications, so having only cut out 74. And then I think we need to decide, is everybody going to consider every application? Ashley had suggested previously that maybe we'll want to just split up and take a closer look. I feel like some of you have taken a pretty close look this weekend, so I don't know if that's really beneficial, because I feel like a lot of you read the whole enchilada for this exercise, which is great and much appreciated. I think for me, it would be helpful if we came up with some kind of scoring system, even if it was as simple as taking the 3 buckets that the commission established and rating how well the application meets the goals of the buckets on a 1 to 10 or something like that. And I say that only because if I have each of you rank them in order of what you think might be most important, then I still get 5 ones. So I still get 5 twos. I still get 5 threes. Where if we did some kind of scoring, it might help me sort of get a gradation of where applications fall, which could bring us closer to figuring out where our numbers might fit. I'm curious if anybody else has thoughts about that. I don't want to make it super complicated. I want to tie it back to our commission buckets, our commission goals that we listed. But I also want us to find at least a somewhat sort of objective way that I can begin to filter down, because clearly we can't fund even these 48 applications if we went with the top half that I have the 2+ on. We're still going to have to cut some. So it would just help, I think, all of us see where we have matching priorities. Thoughts on that? Just shout them out.
Commissioner, it's Melissa Bynum. I've got a variety of questions here, and I know that Erica has offered a side conversation, but I feel like all of us need to hear the qualifying census tract discussion again, because where it's throwing me off is and I got an email from Gwendolyn, so I guess that's the email you're referencing.
Yes, I think Erica sent it to Gwen, and Gwen forwarded it on to the whole group.
Okay, so in that email, it speaks to, for example, some of the Bonner and Edwardsville projects being outside of the qualified census tract area, but yet they got their own ARPA money, so they qualify for something. So I just, I'm not understanding that yet. The document that we're looking at, is this in Teams? This particular spreadsheet that we're viewing on our screen?
If you go in that folder that contained each commissioner's folder with the spreadsheet in it, there's a folder that's labeled with today's date, and that's where this spreadsheet is housed.
Okay, and this spreadsheet does not appear to show me the name of the applicant. Is that true?
I just hid that column so that I could see when I was comparing. I was trying to have all the spreadsheets open at once when I was doing my part of the homework and combining everything. So it's still in there. You could just unhide it.
My last question is this. Erica puts a note again as a reminder of the funding availability, but again, I say, do we not also have access to some of the revenue replacement dollars, and have we identified if and how many of those we're planning to try to allocate here?
The revenue replacement is in the regular budget and not technically under the purview of this committee. So I think the 5 of us could recommend that the full commission consider allocating those dollars in a certain way, but that would have to be part of the regular commission budget discussion. None of that has been sort of currently set aside to go toward this activity. Erica, do you want to give us a little chat about what the census tracts mean and how that all works?
Absolutely. So qualified census tracts as determined by HUD, the Housing and Urban Development Department, identifies which areas qualify as the census tracts where investment dollars, especially those targeted through ARPA, need to be invested. Now, Bonner and Edwardsville, though they're not qualified census tracts, they do count as municipalities, and they did receive direct funding from ARPA to spend on framework allowable expenses. And so I'm not quite sure how they allocated their funds, but as they were given the same framework, and they were given funds for their municipalities directly that they have been allowed to spend.
And I guess my question would be, who among our UG team should we dispatch to contact their city managers to explain that in our estimation, they are not eligible by the census tract rule for any of these ARPA dollars?
Kathleen's the one that had additional discussions with them as they were applying, and obviously she's out of pocket right now. I will loop back with Gwen and Erica, and we can discuss who should have that conversation and who can bring that concern to their attention. Other questions on the census tract situation?
I completely, when I was filling out my form, I completely forgot about the census tract conversation. I'm sure that alone is going to probably remove some projects that got 2 votes. So that actually could be somewhat helpful in.
Well, I think Erica's team already did that analysis. So if they were marked as eligible, her team has already done the census tract.
Yeah, and if I may, not all parts of the framework require a qualified census tract. There are certain types of projects that do require the investment in a qualified census tract, where others do not. They're what's called an enumerated allowable expense. And so for those within the framework, we didn't have to worry about where it was located. So all of those have already been vetted through our program. And that's how we got to the eligible or ineligible or partially eligible, because there are certain pieces of it that would require that versus wouldn't.
So for clarity then, are all of the applications from Bonner and Edwardsville disqualified? They are not. Okay.
Oh, and there are some that made it on. I know for sure there are some that made it onto this final list.
Okay, gotcha. Because I thought that's what we were getting at, was we would have to tell the city managers of both cities that, they're just not able to get any funding. What is being said, if I have this read correctly, is there are some projects that were submitted by Bonner and Edwardsville that are considered ineligible due to the census tract qualification. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you, Chair.
Okay, other questions on the census tract?
Well, let me follow.
I just wanted to point out that I've joined the meeting, and I'm happy to reach out to Bonner. Yeah, this is Kathleen Von Etchen, and I joined the meeting, and I'm happy to reach out to those cities and let them know.
I appreciate that, and welcome. Commissioner Townsend?
To follow up on the issue that both Commissioner Bynum and Davis made, and the statement that some of those Bonner Edwardsville projects may not qualify because of the census tract versus others that may. What is the distinction? How would I know, if I'm looking at all those which I have, that one may or may not qualify because of census tract or for some other reason?
So as we were going through each of them, if it was an enumerated allowable expenditure under the final rule, then we put it as allowable. There are also other pieces such as we had to verify that the budget was equitable for what they're asking for. So it makes sense that we've got this amount of money being asked for to do this type of service. There are some cases where, for service of a very small number of folks, it was a large sum of money. And so within the budget, if it wasn't specifically spelled out how that money would be expended, then that's not allowable under ARPA because of the reasonable expenditure or the reasonable expense, justifiable expense caveat also within the final rule. So within each of these projects, if it was something that was specifically enumerated under the final rule, as long as everything that they put forward had the appropriate language, budgets, and all of the documentation that we needed for that, then it was put forward as allowable and then moved forward through the process. There were some cases where portions of the project were allowable, and so they were moved forward in that yellow category. Now, for those that either weren't enumerated or didn't have the necessary pieces that we need to either tie to COVID or homelessness or some of the other very specifically called out pieces within the final rule, those are ineligible.
Okay, so you've already really taken those factors into the account on the original sheet of 172, where you color coded them as allowable, not allowable, or partially allowable. Okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Okay.
And now I feel like I'm preparing for the bar. So ready to rock and roll. I need to go find my other career.
Okay, thank you.
Not as fun as it seems. No.
Right?
Commissioner Bynum.
With regard to the application itself, and I don't remember, Erica, was there a place within the application to answer the question about if we can't give you full funding, what will you do with the money we do give you? Because I'm wondering, some of these requests are very large. And now we are looking at what dollar amount? 13.8, 14, 15, 16 million total. And so, if we have one that's asking for 3, we may have to make a decision about, partially funding such a large request. So did we ask the question, and are we interested in the discussion about partial allocations, especially on some of these really large requests?
Good question.
Yeah, if I can add, that was my thought exactly, Commissioner Bynum. There were some projects, especially housing, which I love, that folks actually want to build, but we simply cannot, unless we were to add additional money into this bucket, which I am in favor of, given our revenue replacement dollars has been, hashed away. But I agree, we definitely need to have conversations on partial, maybe half or 75%, depending upon how large the request is.
And I see that as very similar to what we do already with the casino grant, requests. That it would be up to, I guess, the requester, but still, I'd be surprised if somebody would just walk away from, if they even got 50% or a third of some of these huge requests.
Yeah, I think I don't think we funded every CARES Act application at 100% either. So I think that is definitely an option. Particularly, some of these are more obvious in that if they're building houses and we fund them less, they're just going to build fewer houses. Like, it's easy to see how it could be scaled. Some are a little more difficult, and we might need to have discussions with the applicant to make sure it is scalable in a way that makes sense. But definitely, I don't think we should feel pressured to fund every application at 100% of the ask, particularly as we want to, I think, we want to fund as many of these awesome applications as we can. And some of them, if we fund them at 100%, that's going to eliminate our ability to fund others. Commissioner Bynum, did you have another question? I couldn't tell if your hand went down and came back up, or if it just never went down.
It did. Another little sidebar. Is it then the thought process of this group that if we were to entertain a notion of funding a housing trust fund, that perhaps that's going to be done through the full commission budget process with the revenue replacement dollars rather than through this process, since, you know, the kind of conversation all along with that was that there was no actual application put in for that project. Just a question.
I'm not sure. I can answer on behalf of the group. Obviously, we have $16 million here to spend, and that group wanted $10 million. So I have not sensed from this group an appetite for spending 10 million of our $16 million on a housing trust fund. If I am incorrect in sensing that that is not the appetite, somebody let me know. We have not brought the housing trust fund. This group has not brought the housing trust fund before the full commission for budget discussion. I think there's still a lot of research that would have to happen to make a decision on whether that was even what we wanted to do. But I think certainly the full commission could discuss it as part of the budget and the revenue replacement funds that are available.
Yeah, if I can add just some thoughts briefly, because I did attend the entire Churches United for Justice Assembly. It is my recommendation that as expeditiously as possible, we include someone from legal in the conversation about the housing trust before we move forward on anything. There's a lot of clarity that I think needs to be given on exactly what we can or cannot do within the state of Kansas. That if it's not a trust or other alternatives, if it is a trust, great. But I think if we can get legal involved first to get some clarity, that can give us some direction first. But I'd hate for us to do a whole bunch of work and then be told no.
Agreed. Commissioner Townsend?
Yeah, I think a good point by Commissioner Davis there. So we're not spinning our wheels with what we can or can't do. Also, with regard to the revenue replacement dollars that are sitting in our general budget fund, if perhaps they were to be used for some of these projects, does the fact that it's currently in our overall budget take away the requirements from ARPA that any money spent have to be exhausted by the project within the 2-year time frame that we're talking about? Are those monies cleansed or different because they would be coming out of our general fund?
My understanding is yes, that those monies are general fund monies now, even though we sort of have categorized them separately to recognize where they came from.
Right.
It's like any other general fund dollars.
Yeah. Okay. And I asked that question because I was thinking along the lines of this trust, as Commissioner Davis has urged, and I agree that we get legal counsel in as soon as possible on this, because the unified government is not set up to be in some perpetual trust situation. And this arose because of ARPA. ARPA money has a limited amount of time, as we all know, to be dispensed with. So that's the other thing we need to consider. What happens if we take this revenue replacement money that's been cleansed, so to speak, of the 2-year time limit? So, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, any other questions? I'm still looking for some feedback on how, team, you would like to move forward. Gwen, do you have something?
Yes, I was going to say that I could reach out to legal if you like, because I had a conversation with Kansas Association of Counties, and they kind of told me a little bit why Wyandotte County is not able to set up a trust because we are not considered urban destination city like Wichita. 'Cause I asked about Wichita because I remember in the meeting that we had with Church United, they mentioned Wichita. And so when I brought that up to Kansas Association of Counties, they said because they're considered an urban destination, and that's based on the population threshold. So they did say that, because Wyandotte County is unique because we're city and county, that if, that we have certain powers to where possibly up under city, it would take a resolution. Well, then, you guys can vote something of that nature in to create an urban trust. However, he did say that I probably should check with our legal department to kind of get more clarity on how that would happen, the steps that would need to take place. So if you'd like for me to do so, I could reach out to legal.
Please do. That would be very helpful. And I think what we really need to figure out is, first of all, is it legally possible? And second of all, what are the risks?
Okay.
What are all the risks, I think, are the questions that will most quickly get us to some sort of conclusion.
Okay, I will do that.
Commissioner Townsend?
Well, the other thing too, as I went through these applications, there were any number of them that dealt in some form or fashion with housing. So if any of my colleagues I'd have to go back and see if we were sent the details of what establishing such a trust would even mean. What were the guidelines, objectives for that? Because, housing has been dealt with in so many good fashions, good applications, from the ones we have here already that are not going to require a trust. So I want to make sure I understand what it is that that the applicant, even though they didn't put in an application, is seeking out of that trust that may or may not be addressed by some of these other applications. So.
Yeah, Gail, I think that's a good point. And I think we kind of brought it up last meeting and we didn't go into a great deal of discussion, but I think we really need to decide what our goal is with regard to housing funding. And if the goal is just to fill a gap in funding, that's all this trust fund does. If the goal is to provide greater wraparound services, then we have many applications that hit on a number of factors that create our housing difficulties in this county. And it's just something for us to sort of ponder, I think, and come to a conclusion on. And I don't know if we want to dedicate just special time to that under one of our agendas and just have that discussion, or if we just want to work it into our analysis of these applications. But I think it's important for us to figure out what that goal is, because if we spend a bunch of money on a housing trust, it only meets that one goal within the housing umbrella. And that may limit the funding that we have to fund these other applications that meet other goals within the housing realm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like the recommendation that you just made, that maybe we focus on that, not to the exclusion of anything else, but particularly on that issue. The next meeting we will have gone past this step to see the 1 and 2s of the applications that were favored by the group, so we have a good sense of what may move forward, and then we can compare it to whatever the objective is for the establishment of that trust and what that was supposed to do. And I'll go back. I know Ms. Adams last week was kind enough to forward a link that included the entire 2 or 3 hours of that presentation over at Mount Carmel. Unfortunately, I couldn't open it, and I forwarded it on to, I think, either Miss Lisa or Miss Deanna, so they may be able to help me. So that might give us all time to hear what the offerers, the proponents, intend to come out of that trust deal. That would be my recommendation, to talk about that specifically at our next meeting.
Okay. So I think that's a good idea. I guess that's the big question here. What do we want that next meeting to look like? We just said we want to talk about those housing related issues. Do we want to focus on the housing related applications and just do group work and go over them next time and decide what do we think we want to fund out of the housing specific applications? Do you want to do it more as homework where you give us some rankings and we come back and look at them like we did today? It sounds like with housing in particular, there's sort of some underlying issues that we maybe need to have discussion about sort of in with our process. If we're all going to come to a conclusion that makes sense, but I just need some feedback, folks, on what you think is the best next step forward. I can go either way. I'm happy to do it as group work, happy to sort of have a meeting to discuss each set of applications, or I'm happy to let you off on your own, take this top half or this top half 2+ list, give some rankings. Like I said, I'd like to have some sort of scoring mechanism because that'll make it easier for me to filter it and try to get us somewhere. You may already, having gone over all the applications, have a pretty good idea of what ones were maybe not in your top 10 or top 20. I don't know. Thoughts?
Well, I have a question about one of the ranking mechanism that you proposed. You were saying if we took this list and you would want each of us to identify rank these 1, 2, or 3, or just yes or no, like you. I'm just trying to keep it simple, or what? I mean. Right.
Well, I was thinking of trying to tie it back to those 3 buckets that the commission identified. And I as I was going through these applications, several of them fit in multiple buckets. And so my thought was like, how well does it meet the goals of this bucket? Rank it 1 to 5 for each bucket. So then those applications that maybe meet the needs of all 3 buckets are going to rise to the top because they're going to get a higher score because they're going to get a score for each bucket. There may be other applications that only meet the needs of 1 bucket. So their score is going to be a little bit lower, but they could still get a 5 in that 1 bucket. I just thought that might be a way to really identify which applications meet the most goals that the commission set. McKiernan's given a thumbs up. 1 to 5 for each bucket was my thought. And when I say the buckets, I'm talking about, I have them up here. Hold on. I'm talking about these.
Yes.
Yes, and there were little bullets under those that I think might have come out in that last email when we had our little reminder when we were doing our homework, but they might be on this. They might be on this somewhere too. Oh, here. Oh, look, they're right below. Yes. So what I was thinking was take each application, give it a score 1 through 5 for community health and well-being, 1 through 5 for infrastructure and built environment, and 1 through 5 for organization and community resilience. So if an application somehow managed to fall in all 3, the highest score it could possibly get would be 5, 10, 15. But some applications may only get 5 because they might not meet any of the other buckets, or some applications might get a 2 because they kind of seem to fit in the bucket, but as you're looking closer at it, you're like, I'm not sure that really meets any of the goals the commission set, or I'm not sure it meets it as well as I thought. So the idea is to start to really dig down into what did the commission as a whole in our group analysis early on say that we wanted, and are these applications meeting those goals?
Yeah, that makes sense. I was thinking to keep it simple. Let's say you're looking at an application and it fits all 3. I would just give them a 1 for each one. It's almost like a yes or no thing. So, they get a score of 3. If they didn't meet one of them, then they get score 2. But I see where you're going. I understand that. Yeah.
Commissioner Bynum?
Thanks. I'm going to take us backwards a little bit, Angela, because I want to step back to the cold weather project that has apparently been deemed ineligible. I guess because its duration is only for a short while rather than year round. And the part of the reason why I am concerned is because in December, as we worked through vision, values, goals, and needs, one of our strategies was to provide our unhoused population with co-located resources needed for the upcoming winter in partnership with community organizations and groups. And so I guess maybe back in December, we might have been unaware. I don't know how we brought it forward as a strategy. And now here we are at the funding stage saying it's ineligible. And it makes me think of a broader question, which is these three buckets that we're referencing now. Are we 100% certain that the things inside these buckets are indeed eligible expenditures? Because now I'm concerned. And that's it. I just wanted to return to that cold weather item.
Yeah, so everything that you have before you that says that it's eligible has already gone through that eligibility requirement check against the framework with our team. So anything that you choose to move forward that has been deemed eligible, when you rank it based on how it fits within your priorities, it's good to move forward. Now, if we have concerns about some things that were funded previously that we've used a framework for, we can certainly revisit those as we need to. But I believe that those pieces have been covered well with Kathleen's team. So if we have other questions related to that, I'd be happy to dig deeper on some of those ones that are partially eligible or ineligible to discuss the why.
It's Melissa. And I guess the why that we were given, Erica, is if it were a year-round event, it creates eligibility, but since it's only intended for cold weather, it's not. Am I understanding that correctly?
They submitted it as extreme weather, so both hot and cold. And because it doesn't have any connection to COVID, it doesn't have any broad reaches to addressing houselessness through sheltering year round, it's not eligible. We can't make that stretch.
Okay. Are there, and again, maybe that's maybe a further conversation is an offline conversation, because perhaps this is an application that we could work with to try to bring it to some level of eligibility. Yes or no?
I'm not, what I would say is, yes, we should take this offline. And I would say to the subcommittee that if we're able to find a way, we'll certainly let you all know via email what updates have been made.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Thank you. You caught me looking up some stuff. So I do like your idea about trying to evaluate on a continuum how well any one of the applications meets these three commission goals. When I first started going through the big spreadsheet, I actually had community health and well-being as one, and then the first bullet was A, and the second bullet was B, and the third bullet was C. And I was trying to do that with that level of detail. It quickly overwhelmed me, and I quit doing that. But I do think with a smaller population of applications to look at, I do appreciate qualifying each one of them in terms of at least the three broad goals, and then how well it meets maybe on a 1, 2, 3 scale rather than a 1 to 5, but I'm comfortable with a 1 to 5. One of the things that I then start to ask myself is, okay, on what basis do I give it a 1 versus a 2 versus a 3? Is it scope narrow versus broad? Things like that. I go back to our casino grant application, and that's what I was looking up here. The Community Foundation assigns whether or not it meets, for example, reaches an at-risk or underserved population, whether or not it has active community partners, whether or not it has measurable outcomes, whether or not it has leverages additional funding. And I wonder if some of those that we use for evaluating the casino grant applications could also be useful guidance for evaluating these applications a little bit more thoroughly with the purpose of ranking them.
So like it gets a 1 just because it meets one of these buckets, but then it gets a 2 if it has a partner or what meets one of those other qualifications, and that's how it can kind of ramp up its score.
I think that certainly how many of those 5 that the casino grant applications that I review, they certainly get a higher score from me based on how many of those 5 they satisfy per the Community Foundation's evaluation. And I don't know that that's necessarily exactly the criteria we want to use, but I wonder if something similar could be a way to fairly objectively assign a ranking to the remaining applications now that we've whittled them down.
I like that. Other thoughts? So what I'm thinking is I might need to do a little group up with staff separately to figure out how to make this as easy as possible for you guys, to sort of create that ranking system and set up the spreadsheet. I'm not a spreadsheet master by any means. I could use like basic commands, but I like to be able to set it up in a way that it's pretty easy for you to create those ranks and have it all add up itself and all those sorts of things. And I need to figure out with our team how much doing that would take, and how easy we could make it for you. I think that might be the next step, Commissioner Townsend.
Well, I like where what Commissioner McKiernan was saying with regard to the casino grant considerations, because it would make it less arbitrary. That's what I was concerned about when we were saying, look at the buckets and go from 1 to 5. Well, you know, there may be a big difference between a 1 and a 4, but what about a 1 and a 2? But if they tick certain boxes, if they meet certain criteria that, you know, you can figure out how to put in a spreadsheet, that would take some of the arbitrariness out of it, and make it more equal, I think. So I'm good with 1, 2, 3 because it's simple, but
right,
to refine it a little bit more, you know, as long as we're all using the same criteria, then it would be, I think, even more meaningful.
Great. Yeah, I think several commissioners expressed wanting this next round to be more objective. So I think that's definitely something I'm hearing reflected and that everyone is looking for. I think it might actually be easier than what we just did this weekend, where we just tried to look at the applications and go, oh my gosh, is this a good application or a bad one? Because they're all good. We just need to find a way to narrow it down to the ones that are most closely tied to these goals. All right, so that I think means I have a little assignment to figure out. I think we'll do 1 through 3. I think that makes more sense than 1 through 5. I don't know why I went to 5. It just seemed like a random number. I just picked it. And then it's going to be 1 if they meet one of these, if they fall in one of these columns at all. And then 2 and 3 will be if they meet additional qualifying factors. And I will get with staff to work through how we can make that process easy for you on the spreadsheet to be able to assign those rankings. And then we will come back together and we will discuss both the rankings, and we'll have how we rated the housing related projects at that meeting as well. So I think that will tie nicely into a discussion about the applications and the housing applications we have, how they rank, and whether that meets our goal as a group, or whether we need to have additional discussion about other housing options to meet our goals as a commission. Does that sound good?
Sounds good to me, Townsend.
Great. Davis had to jump off for a different meeting, so I will move back with him and let him know that that is the task I have taken on. I think that will get us moving in the right direction pretty quickly and bring some of these applications to the top. Team, anything else we need to address? I mean, this is really just for us to get an idea of where we stood. Oh, I do think we have one more thing to address. Do we want to work off of the full top half list with 99 items on it? Or do we want to work off of the top half plus 2 that had only 48? Do we want to knock off those items that only had 1 supporter at this stage? So there's 100 of them. If we use the ones with only 1, if we use anything that had any support at all, if we use anything that had any support, we have 100 applications. Otherwise, if it had 2 or more, that gets us to 48. Go ahead, Commissioner Townsend.
Like I said, and forgive me, I've been trying, but I just wanted to say that I want to look at this again, what you submitted, and even maybe there's some on there I can't correlate them without the numbers that I saw in the 172. There, I might offer 1 or 2 more, but these look similar, that there might be a couple of more things that I would submit. So
understood.
Thank you.
Thoughts, guys, on how big of a list we are going to tackle? I'm fine either way. Just how many do you want to have to rank is the question I'm asking. Do you feel like we still want to be considering those that only had 1 support? I mean, I guess part of me is asking, how in-depth was your review and how good do you feel about where we are?
So is the option to rank for the 3 buckets 100 or something less than 100?
Yeah, the question is, do you want to rank all 100 applications that got any support at all from any of the 5 of you? Or do you only want to rank with the 48 that got 2 or more persons in support?
Oh.
I mean, it's easy to say 48 sounds better than 100, but I also don't want to boot any applications that people felt strongly about, strongly enough to give their support of 1. So I want to make sure I have support if we're going to go with the 48 for that concept.
I may want to kick myself later, but the conservative approach would be the 100. We're not going to do this again in any time soon. And it would be, I guess, the best and fairest way to make sure that, we looked at this list that got some support from someone. Like I said, I might, I still have to kick in. I might be the second one on the group that only got 1, So I know I want to kick myself tomorrow, but in my heart of hearts, in my head, I guess the 100 would be the fairest thing to do at this juncture. And then we'll move on. Eventually, whatever's going to fall out is going to fall out because we only have X amount of dollars. That's what's going to really be the determinant. But we've given it the broadest review possible.
Commissioner McKiernan?
I hate to say that I agree with Commissioner Townsend, but I do. I mean, under normal circumstances, I would say I always love to agree with Commissioner Townsend. In this case, I do think she's hit on something that's right. It's very possible that I'll look at one of these that only had 1. And in this review, I'll now have to ask myself, if I didn't give that 1, okay, let me look at this again. Let me think about what might have led one of my colleagues to select it. Is there merit that I maybe overlooked as I went through 150? And now I reconsider it. So as much as I would prefer to just narrow and move on, it would probably be in the best interests of all the applicants if we did anything that got a vote or more.
Commissioner Bynum, and I agree.
Very good. I kind of felt that was the direction we would head, but I wanted to give you the option. I think that's fine. And I know many of you read all the Word documents already, so maybe it's a little quicker the second go around because you already have some basic familiarity. So hopefully it'll speed it up a little bit. All right. So at some point, hopefully in the near future, you're going to get an email directive from me with additional instructions along the lines we discussed today, but with some more specificity as I get some assistance from staff to figure out what makes the most sense. And depending on how long it takes us to figure out how to make it as easy as possible for you, that'll make the difference on when sort of the deadline is for you to finish this homework, because it's going to take us a little time to make it workable and in an easy format. Then that deadline might get pushed out a little, but I think it would be worth it, rather than you guys staying up all night every night for the next 3 days or something, trying to figure out how to do it yourself. So I'm going to try to make it easy for you, and I'll give you a deadline accordingly. Commissioner Bynum?
I do apologize for circling back to the cold weather shelter again, but I was sitting here thinking we've got the, I have an email from Rachel at Crosslines, and I think they might have been the ones submitting for that project. And she was asking about the project being unallowable. And that other communities appear to have utilized their ARPA dollars for a similar model. And so it's just getting me to circle back around to how that's possible. And I've been pondering that, and the only reason I can come up with is perhaps they just haven't done their reporting yet, to discover that it's in fact not allowable, or as Erica points out, perhaps it's a revenue replacement item, which I would fully support looking at through that side of the process. So anyway, I'm sorry to bring it up again, but I just keep pondering.
Thanks, Commissioner. And if you would link up and have that side conversation with Erica to get some additional detail, if for some reason there's a way that can land back on this list, I would add it into we'd make it 101 so that could get full consideration, since it didn't get consideration perhaps because it was listed as ineligible to begin with. So Erica can let me know if we circle back around and decide that gets added to the list, then I will make sure that happens, and we'll deal with that as one of the top half items.
Okay, and thanks for bearing with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Commissioner Townsend?
Well, this goes back, I guess, to the question for clarification's sake I asked earlier about money that's in our revenue replacement general fund now that presumably has been cleansed. So let's say, for argument's sake, the shelter issue that Commissioner Bynum, because I was flabbergasted when I saw that on the not eligible list. But if something like that were to be funded out of revenue replacement, we would not have the ARPA eligible issues to deal with. Just so I'm clear?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I think maybe in a future meeting, as we've kind of dealt with these applications, if we want to have additional discussion about whether we'd like to submit a list of items we would like the full commission to consider using revenue replacement funds for, we can certainly do that as a committee. I would caution, as all of you know, that money is in our general fund, so it's probably being considered as part of the normal budget process as it is, which means if we're going to spend that money on something else, then we're probably taking it away from something that staff was already expecting to use it for. So just as it is, it's in our regular budget discussion, but I think it's fair if we would like the commission to consider some items, or at least want the commission to have the option to discuss those items. We can certainly kind of create a list, and I can submit that to the mayor and say, hey, we'd like to have this discussion as part of the budget discussion.
Okay.
All right. Any other questions? If not, I won't keep you. because I have homework to do now to get you guys ready for the next round. But I appreciate you helping decide the right direction for us going forward. And like I said, I appreciate very much. I know you all spend a lot of time on this homework. And I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate your dedication and your willingness to work through the applications. And like I said, I hope those who have submitted grants do as well, and understand how much time and energy you guys put into this committee and this work in particular. All right. Gwen and Erica and anybody else from staff, I guess, that wants to, if you want to stay on with me for a couple seconds, we can group up and figure out what the next step for us is, and we'll let the commissioners drop off and go back to their lives a whole 30 minutes early. Lucky you.
I only took